life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Bern, over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about some controversial issues, and I think last week we got into a very spirited discussion about the differences that seem to exist amongst people of different cultures and ethnic backgrounds. And I think it's certainly something that's a hot conversation topic these days. It's been around for a long time, and we seem to keep struggling as a human society with how to best deal with these issues and to go forward with more peace and harmony amongst ourselves. And we were talking about some ways that we can do that. Perhaps we could recap quickly and then go forward.
Yeah, we were attempting to make the point, I think we did fairly well last week, about as long as we're protoplasmically focused, we'll always have problems. That's a good term. Where'd that come from? No, seriously, for some time now I've been trying to make the point that as human beings, we're fundamentally a product of what's happening in our minds, and that our minds are trichotomous. That causes some confusion already. There's conflict going on in there. And then when we examine the brain carefully, we get down into the subliminal regions, the thalamic and hypothalamic regions, and they're phalenial and reptilian in nature, and so they're very natural. And if we have an undeveloped conscious and a cognitive sieve, then prejudice and generalization and these kinds of things are natural. For example, if we can remain conscious of the fact that the protoplasm that I made reference to, the body that we have, is primarily designed only to accommodate the brain, okay, and the functions of the mind. For example, the body is designed to perambulate, to review very quickly, which means to get around, to walk, to run, and what have you. And anything that does it better than the body was created by the mind. The wheel, the car, the plane, the boat, and what have you. And then we talked about propagation. The fact that the body is beautifully designed to propagate. But what it is, the brain wants more brains. Now it doesn't care. The part of the brain that dictates propagation, that creates the lust and the chemical flows and the flushing and what have you, doesn't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. It has no socioeconomic conscience. In other words, we propagate just because the brain wants us to, irrespective of socioeconomics or social mores.
It's a biological function.
Yeah, and until we can take our young people and make them aware of that, they're going to continue making mistakes that can create all kinds of havoc in their lives. And then, of course, there's the perpetuation of the environment. To perpetuate means to establish the environment and maintain it in such a way we can continue to survive.
Warmth, clothing, food, shelter.
And we're weak at this probably of all three. I mean, because the environment pretty well takes care of itself until it doesn't. But we are conscious, we are highly adaptive, and I'm optimistic that when the time is right, we'll turn a necessary amount of attention to this, and we'll probably do very well.
Well, in other shows, we've talked about the difference between reacting without thinking from a purely instinctive level, as opposed to responding as the result of conscious, careful thought, and what a difference that makes in the choices that we make and the consequences that come from conscious choice.
Yeah, we are naturally reactive. That's natural.
It's easy to do.
Yeah, and that's coming from a subliminal mind that's in survival, and every impulse impacts it, it reacts, and boy, then you go. It's only when the conscious mind, the supranaturalness of it, takes over, and when we can start making good sound judgments, okay, conscientious judgments, if you would, and things get a whole lot better. We were talking last week that I'm really optimistic about our future because I know there's parenting and educating and reasoning that's going on our planet today that is so forward compared to anything in the past. Now, like anything else.
It occurred to me as we were sitting here thinking that it's really obvious and apparent to us when we stop and talk about it that, oh yeah, there's a difference between instinctively reacting as opposed to making a careful decision. I think we all know that. But how often in the heat of the moment do we stop and ask ourselves that question? Or do we just react?
Well, if
and
you
then
don't know-
later on regret it?
Yeah, if you don't know the questions to ask, they don't get asked.
Right.
That's one of the reasons that we've spent so much time and effort developing the life formula that we teach. And we'll be doing that in the next few weeks again. We've done it in the past, and I have a consistent series of essays over and over. I'll do 2 and 3 sometimes life formula essays per week in the community. Because the more people that see this, the more harmony seems to be reigning in their families and the workplace. And what it is, it's a way of becoming objective, which means conscious,
Yes.
rather than subjective or reactive. See, when we're subjective, we think we're the center of the universe, and anything is going to threaten us. You know what I mean? And when we get objective, we're the center of our own universe and can really take command of what's going to be happening. It's pretty exciting. I know we were talking last week in depth about racism, and I think if people either missed the show or want to hear more about it, they need to call in and let us know. By the way, our number is 1-800-661-3490. We can make reference to that occasionally.
Well, and I think our producer Nick made a very interesting point after the show. He said, I think it's important to clarify to people that it's not an issue of black or white or yellow or brown. It's an issue of differentness, cultural differentness as opposed to color differentness that tends to be what really bothers people.
Well, I think it's the development of the culture and having it thrust upon the others that could cause problems. There is always the color issue and always will be until we begin to be conscious about it. We talked about dyed chicks and how they'll fight until they shed their down and take on white feathers and become pals. And we talked about how when whites and blacks and actually Orientals and Spanish people were thrust into barracks in the Navy, how after a few weeks they began to harmonize because the variables had been reduced. And whenever we accentuate the difference, we actually kind of promote the difference.
Confrontation.
Yeah, and confrontation. And yet, people have to be allowed and encouraged and celebrated to celebrate their heritage. I don't know what mine is, and so I'm a little envious, frankly. Years ago, I remember my family did a search back and back and back, and it got way past, anything we could account to. And then, of course, the story was that our ancestors came over on the Mayflower. And I know that that's probably not so, because if everyone came over on the Mayflower that was presumed to have, the Mayflower would have been the size of the Queen Mary. You know what I mean? It was one of those, those kind of things.
That's interesting.
But that heritage is so mixed up back in there, I have no idea. And so I'm a little envious of being able to have a root that I could go back and cling to. And I think that's nice. But to thrust that root into the socioeconomic environment, can cause all kinds of problems. I don't know that it's fair or right, for example, but the English language is pretty well accepted internationally now as the socioeconomic language. Because if you don't speak English, you could, now granted, if we can't speak Japanese when we go there, or Russian, it's going to be a challenge. But the big challenge is if they don't learn English, because English has become internationally the language of economics. And so if you're concerned about moving forward economically, you better get serious about your English language.
Well, it seems like in any profession you need to be looking for the areas that you can relate either to your colleagues, your superiors, the people that maybe you are managing, your customers, your vendors. The more areas of relatability that you can find with those people, the more successful you are in those relationships. So it's not just a cultural thing in a broad sense, but also in a very small sense of the word.
This perambulation, propagation, I wanted to kind of get into that because we talked very briefly last week about how a male meets a female and juices flow and they presume to fall in love and have sex and have a baby and they call it a miracle. And I said that cockroaches do that. In other words, we got to be careful about that kind of thinking because every impregnation is the protoplasmic response to the need of the brain to create new brains, and a part of the brain that can't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. Okay, so it doesn't care about socioeconomics or social mores, and as a result, with the advent of the automobile and the freedom of young people, I mean, this country has gone forward into a critical mess that I foresaw in 1947. Because I wrote a essay in college in my college in my high school in my senior year that I got a good grade on it and got in a lot of trouble. Okay, and what I had written in that essay at that time was the fact that I believed that our society internationally would move to a place where they would be shoulder-shruggingly accepting of abortion, okay, as a evolutionary prerequisite to euthanasia and suicide. Okay, in other words, it was something that the mass, you know what I mean, had to go through in order to get to that point. And I got into all kinds of trouble about that. And yet, Gina, not that I want to be right, but I tell you, I'm being certified. The fact that indeed, in mass, and thankfully there'll always be those who will fight and resist and, the movement, but there's a lot of shoulder-shrugging acceptance of abortion. I mean, I think I'd agree with that.
And euthanasia is legal in certain countries.
Exactly, and now, I don't think there's hardly a newspaper, a TV show, there's hardly a day goes by when I don't read something about euthanasia and suicide as becoming a more common thing. And Holland has been committing euthanasia now for several years. I know the last time I heard about 3 years ago, there was 27,000 people put to sleep by their own request and by the request of the family. 27,000 people. You know what I mean? And it had become a cultural acceptance there. And it's gradually permeating in this country. Dr. Kevorkian, for example, one day, whether we like it or not, will be looked back not as a hero, certainly, but as a pioneer. In other words, people will accept that, and I believe it'll become a fairly common thing. In other words, the ethics people and I think a lot of religious posturing is kind of going to be losing the battle in mass. Now, they'll never stop fighting, and I hope that's true. It's like in the abortion issue. I think we continue needing people who will jump up and down and campaign and picket and what have you against it. And then there's going to be people over here who are for it. And so long as people are yelling, the masses in the middle will be thinking. You know what I mean? In other words, yeah, but you do have to keep it alive. And I think the same thing is going to be occurring with the euthanasia situation, because we do have a international community that's getting older and older, fewer and fewer young people, less and less money. You know what I mean? It's already way out of balance. And so the exercise of choice had to go through, I think, the abortion issue, because somehow this was a primal issue. Okay, and the conscious mind can more readily deal with that in order to prepare itself for what might be called the biggie. You remember the movie Soylent Green?
I didn't see it.
Really, very prophetic, except I don't think that necessarily we'll be eating one another, in little green capsules. But the society had progressed to the point, economically and socially, where people were invited to come to, I believe they call them separation centers. And they would come in and they'd register in and they'd lay on a table and they'd be shown beautiful scenes that they hadn't seen in their lifetime because of the way things were now. And they would be put to sleep. And then they'd take the bodies and prepare them for the protein, which was so scarce. But some of those things can be kind of like, you have to think about it. A lot of these movies like Rollerball and Logan's Run, and some of these others. For example, you think of Logan's Run, you think of the latest episode that some people might have heard about, where the people committed suicide in order to get on the rocket that was behind the comet or the spaceship. The Logan's Run was very similar to that. And the society had been conditioned to a point where it would go to the carousel. And I was at 35 years old. It was your destiny. I mean, it was a celebrated issue to go. Did you see Logan's Run,
yes.
Perhaps? Yeah, to go to the carousel and be lifted up and be electronically zapped, and people would cheer and what have you, until Logan found out that there probably was no afterlife that they were talking about. So I didn't want to get zapped. And so they made a movie out of that. But there's a lot of prophecy in some of those things, I think. I think all of us can be a prophet if we think. what is happening, what are the numbers, what's our propensity, how does the
trends?
mind work, yeah, and you can begin to see those things. Whether we like them or not, that's the way they're going to be, I believe. And so only time will tell. I do know that we need not submit to the function of the protoplasm of the body when we become more and more conscious. Okay, we know, for example, that a person can develop the socio-economic responsibilities to remain not unpregnant, however they do that. Okay, I have a lot of feelings about that, and I don't know if you do or not, but yeah, we can get into that some other time. Perpetuating the environment, again, I'm optimistic. Not very good at it now. We'll get better and better as time goes on.
We certainly are inventing more and more devices and gadgets to make our lives easier as far as keeping an environment that's desirable for our bodies to thrive in.
There's some new products coming out now where no soap is being used in laundries. Are you familiar with what's going on out there? And if that catches on, I mean, there's no question it could make a major contribution to our environment. I mean, no granules, no soap, no detergent, just some kind of a ball or a donut or some kind of object you throw into the wash, and it ionizes or changes the ionization of the water, makes it soft, gets the job done. That's major. I mean, those kind of things are very, gives us reason to be hopeful for the future. Pretty excited about it. Where do you want to go from here? You got any ideas?
Well, it's certainly been interesting to talk about this, and actually a question occurred to me, and I don't know if this is exactly the forum to discuss it, but we're looking at changes in social values when we're talking about the acceptance of abortion, something that was historically done in dark alleys and was certainly not discussed in mainstream society, as well as euthanasia, other topics. How do we as a culture, as a society, as a human race on the planet, collectively decide what our values are going to be? Obviously, everyone's going to have, to some level, an individual set of values, but there are general principles that govern society. How do we determine what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable? And that seems to shift through the generations. And is always shifting for the better?
Just because I continue to believe that as we become more conscious, okay, and as when we begin to understand the trichotomous relationship in the brain, okay, and recognize that the subconscious mind is an ignorant, indolent, surviving entity, okay, that will, however, adapt very quickly to the appropriate adjustments that the conscious mind makes. That's why we're getting better and better and better. And there'll come a time when people will not become pregnant by accident, by mistake. You know what I mean? Because they will begin to understand how to influence that effectively. I mean, that gradually will eliminate itself.
Do you think that will really happen, though, when we have a new generation of people every year who don't have the benefit of experience? It seems like all of us go through a cycle or series of cycles in our lives where we look back on the last 10 years or the last 20 years and realize how much we've grown and changed.
I think so. A lot of it, like I say, is...
I mean, everyone's born starting at ground zero, really.
Well, not really. Well, they're born at ground zero, but more from the very beginning. The input is so much grander now than it was. I've got 6 children who are raising children who are so much more prepared and have been since they were... I mean, I have grandchildren that know more about life and living, okay, at 6 than I knew at 30. There was no question about it. I mean, I had so many difficulties in my life, so much hurt and pain and upset. And fortunately, I had a mind with which to think and to wonder and to imagine and to experiment and read and test and what have you, and came up with a lot of ideas and even conclusions that really changed my whole life, that have allowed me to convey that to other people. But I see some parenting going on that's just awesome. I see some inappropriate parenting, but not nearly as inappropriate as it used to be, except for the extremes. It's kind of like, for example, the other day, in fact every day, somewhere in the country there's some discussion about some boyfriend or step-parent or a parent that kills a child, okay? And just the other day, I was privy to some research that had been done on cats, all the way from tigers and lions all the way down to the house variety of cat. And they all felines, okay, males will kill the offspring of another male, okay? And so, since we have a filial mind, okay, at the base level, a lot of human beings, will put upon the children of other males. So, you know what I'm saying? In other words, and so, but not until we become conscious that we stop doing that. And so, as we become more aware of, like I say, of the fact that we have three minds, subconscious, conscious, and conscience, and how to orchestrate them and coordinate them, honoring one, assuaging the other, creating a little team out of that trichotomy, that things are going to get better and better and better and more powerful.
Well, it seemed that one way maybe we perhaps controlled that in the past was there was a lower divorce rate, there was lower combined family rate, and wouldn't the chance or opportunity for this filial mind to take over increase as you have more and more recombined families and
Yes,
that
exactly.
isn't that a challenge that we face more now than we used to? And also we have more and more children now than ever who are in daycare for extended periods of time where they're being taken care of by other than a parent. And how do we know what kind of teaching and training they're getting in that environment?
Exactly.
That's not done out of love or nurturing. To some degree it is, and I've had good daycare as well. But how much of that is financially based? How many heads can I get in? How much money can I make this as a business I'm running here? And how much concern is there for the quality of human beings that we're raising? Because obviously, as much as we'd like to think we're going to live forever, we're not.
Right.
What's the next generation going to be like and the generation after that?
Better still.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so optimistic. We're finding, for example, ways of learning that accelerate this process. Do you know that spinning accelerates learning? Latest research, there's a fellow the name doesn't come to mind right now, out of England, who has been given a huge grant to travel all over the world and investigate the best results coming from educational processes. And one of the things, I think it was in Australia, they found that these kids were really absorbing information at a dramatic rate, and some teacher had started them spinning. To say that would stimulate the brain core, you know what I mean? And so they figure, well, if it's copyable, let's try it. And sure enough, the more kids that spin, the more adults that spin. I mean spinning. And I was standing in place and counterclockwise, just turning around a few times.
Well,
Now, you
certainly
start with
stimulate
3 or 4.
something.
Yeah. 3 or 4 spins, work up to 6, maybe 10, and after pretty soon for a whole minute. And it does seem to stimulate the brain in such a way that it's more receptive to ideas. There's better circulation and everything. So, I mean, all little things like that. They're finding, too, that I think teachers are becoming more liberal about finding ways that children actually learn. It used to be that the daydreamer was punished.
Yes.
There's more and more teachers beginning to understand, let the daydreamer dream. That's our future. The daydreamers are our future. You know what I mean? To shut that down, this is how that kid creates, and not to shut it down, and we've been shutting it down. It's kind of like grieving. We're gradually learning, let the child cry, encourage them to cry. See, what did I hear when I was a little kid? If you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. I've got kids telling I've got my kids telling their kids, go ahead and cry, sweetheart, that's fine for you. You know what I mean? And when you let them, they stop. But as they do, they detoxify. It reduces their stress. See, we're finding out this stuff and using it, and so we're getting better. There's no question about it. And hopefully we can contribute to that on this show. Because as people listen in and have their thought provoked, say, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Time and time again, I've had people say, what's that show about? They'll surf to us and see 10 minutes, and there's 2 talking heads there, an old one and a pretty one. And say, what's that all about? Well, it's about life, living, and making a living. It's about reperceiving some of the processes that we've been led to believe. It's about Kurt Uliops, which are admonitions and aphorisms that don't work. This morning I addressed a company and got into this, and they sat there and just kind of mesmerized about, you're right. When you hear it, it makes sense, but until someone says it. You've heard the old saw that that's easier said than done. You're having a brighter future. It doesn't get done until it's said.
That's true.
So it starts with words, starts with ideas, and those ideas are expanded and promulgated, and I'm pretty optimistic. I do know that I'm going to, these last 2 shows are going to get some letters and phone calls. And just to encourage that, I love to be challenged and put upon, it doesn't bother me a bit, but if people will call 1-800-661-3490, we'll receive your call. If you give us your address, we will send out a TV guide, letting you know when we're on. Some people say, well, why are you on the same show 3 times, 4 times a week? is so people can review. That you watch this conversation one time and it's just kind of like, what are they talking about? Second time you go, oh, I see. Third time you might begin to agree. You know what I mean? Because you begin to assimilate and be illuminated by the conversation. That's the intention at any rate. But call in, we'll send you an address, and by the way, we'll send you out a TV guide and two tickets to a live essay that we'll be doing here in the community very soon about the life formula, which is an extension of some of the things we've been talking about today. A life formula that's been well received all over the hemisphere and has dramatically impacted just a few folks. Gina, it's winding down, and I'm looking for the phone calls and the letters, and if you can pick up anything this week, we'll get into it next week about it. Meanwhile, this is Life Talk. About life, living, and making a living, and my name is Bern
Moses.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Bern.
And we will...